Going to another topic. Judicial Watch has filed an amicus brief, a friend of court brief, with the Supreme Court on an important case. One that's probably more important than the media will ever tell you about, but it goes to the heart of what we are as a country and where we are constitutionally speaking. There is a challenge to a memorial cross here in Blandesburg, Maryland, by the usual suspects who don't like crosses on allegedly public property. It's a World War I memorial cross. It's been up there for 93 years. The lower court had ruled that the memorial may have to be torn down because it violates the Constitution. And obviously supporters of the memorial have pursued their case all the way up to the Supreme Court. And so when we have an interest, we're not the underlying litigants, but we filed a Supreme Court friend of court brief. You'll see this green booklet. Why is it green? Because that's what the Supreme Court tells us it has to be. Depending on what you file and whose side you're on, the color of the booklet and varies. And we got to be sure to follow the Supreme Court rules. So that's why the booklet is green. And we make the point that the Supreme Court, in terms of the First Amendment, needs to get back to the basics. Because the left has interpreted the Establishment Clause of the U.S. Constitution that respecting the establishment of a religion as to prohibit public displays of religion on government property, or namely federal property in this case. But that's not what the Establishment Clause says, and that's not what the history of the clause is. The language ratified, as we point out, plainly restrained federal establishment of religion. This point is found both in the words chosen and ratified, as well as the history and acceptance of state establishments. So when the First Amendment says Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of a religion, it's saying that the federal government can't establish a state religion. Of course, the states at the time were establishing stated religions, and that's what the Supreme Court, that's what the First Amendment was trying to protect. They can't get in the business, A, of establishing a state religion or prohibiting state establishment of religion. This point is found in both the words chosen and ratified, as well as the history and acceptance of state establishments. As ratified, the Establishment Clause prohibits Congress from making any law respecting an establishment of religion. Respecting was language adopted by joint committee. Both the Senate and the House versions of the amendment sent to the joint committee stated that Congress shall make no law establishing. By adding the word respecting, the joint committee and subsequently the ratifiers were making it clear that Congress had no power, quote, with reference to or with regard to religious establishment. The text and history of the Establishment Clause strongly suggests that it is a federalism provision intended to prevent Congress from interfering with state establishments. Thus, unlike the Free Exercise Clause, the free exercise thereof, which does protect individual right, it makes little sense to incorporate the Establishment Clause. By incorporation was applying it against the states. History supports this plain language interpretation of the Establishment Clause. In addition to public support of religion in the public square at the time of the ratification of the Bill of Rights, at least 6 states had established churches. Had the framers intended the Establishment Clause to protect individual rights, these states' establishments would have been unconstitutional. And what do I mean by individual rights? Those challenging this cross say they are offended by the cross. And their rights are being infringed. Well, that's ridiculous. And it's ridiculous, as we point out in this brief. Now, the problem with the First Amendment litigation or jurisprudence in this area is that the court's been all over the place. There have been fights about nativity displays. about Ten Commandment displays, and obviously there's going to be a fight about the cross. Again, a cross which would have to be torn down. And one of the effective things we do in this brief is we provide pictures of other crosses and other national memorials that would also probably have to be turned down. This is a cross in Arlington Cemetery. This is another cross in Arlington Cemetery. This is a cross in Connecticut. This is a cross in Cypress Hills, New York. These are all government property crosses. These are crosses in New Mexico, all over the country. Do you know that in this case, one of the lower courts suggested that they, in order to make the cross constitutionally acceptable, they cut the arms off? But that's how far out the courts have been in their anti-religious zealotry here. The Establishment Clause of the United States does not prohibit the public expression or religious belief on public property. It simply doesn't. And if you don't like it, there's no individual right to complain about it constitutionally. It's simple. To suggest otherwise is at odds with our constitutional history. There's been some Supreme Court precedents that have suggested that, well, you know, like crosses and Ten Commandment displays, as long as they've been around a long time and have achieved some sort of secular purpose, we can keep them. Well, that's, you know, that may be fine in terms of allowing these public displays of religion to remain on public property, but constitutionally speaking, it's completely out to lunch. As long as these religious icons are violative of the first commandment, they're okay, constitutionally speaking? Well, obviously that can't be the case. Our founders would be turning over in their graves at that very idea. So now there are significant numbers of conservatives on the court that used to not to be there, thanks to President Trump's 2 appointees. So we'll see. Maybe we'll get a better get a good result here. So to hear the argument next week. So, if I dare say it, let's pray for wisdom and discernment for our Supreme Court justices, and let's pray also for courage for the rest of the branches of government, so that they also stand up for the rule of law and religious expression as protected by the Constitution.